All right. Want to have some daily conversations. If you're stuck inside like we are, wanted to talk about some things that we think are interesting, relevant, pointed topics for people that are early in their careers and, trying to figure it out. Cameron and I were just talking about the choice to move away from home, what it's like making that decision. What are the trade-offs? I know that I moved away from home almost a decade ago. You're probably the same, but I think that's a really cool conversation topic. I think it's something that a lot of young people may struggle with when they're trying to decide. That choice has a lot of impacts on pretty much everything in life. And I think that before I did it, I was really scared of it. And I've learned so much over the past decade taking that leap. So I'd love to hear your experience too, and then we can just riff on that and see where it
Awesome.
goes.
Let's do it. So yeah, I think moving away and that whole decision of like, all right, am I going to move to a new city? I'm going to move out of my family house, etc. It obviously like that lines up with getting your own life started and like achieving independence, etc. For myself, very similar to you, first time I moved away was for college, going down to Charleston.
18 years old.
From New Jersey. Yep. Pretty much 18 years old. And I think, once I moved for college, I had no intention of ever going back home, either specifically like living at my parents' house ever again, or also going back to New Jersey specifically. When I left, the whole college decision was probably more about getting out of my specific area as much as it was about like, hey, like it's time to go to college and everything.
Yeah, it was college for me. That's when I finally made the move. But I remember being like, as young as like 6 years old, vividly remembering like, I'm going to run away from home someday. My mom loves to tell this story about when I was like 4 or 5. I wasn't allowed to cross the street at the busy street at the end of the street we lived on. But one day I got just completely frustrated. I packed everything, like a few plums, my baseball glove and a ball, whatever other things, stuffed in my backpack, and I went and I hung out underneath the tree at the end of the street because I knew that if I crossed that street, I was going to be a deep shit. But I told her, I was like, I'm running away to Houston to live with my aunt. And that's like one of the earliest vivid memories I can think of. But I know that it was a theme when I was kind of in those younger years. Like it wasn't so much that I hated where I was from. It was more that just like this fascination with what else is out there. What do I not know about? What kind of opportunities are out there? And I probably had no reason to believe that those opportunities weren't accessible where I was. But I just had this kind of innate belief that there was something else out there, and it was like this really exciting thing. And I kind of set my sights on that from a really young age. And once I finally got out on my own, I started learning so many things, most of those lessons the hard way. But it was kind of like liberating. It was liberating and also terrifying at the same time, because it forced me to figure out a lot of stuff on my own. I moved back one time a few years after college for a brief stint, while I was trying to like figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up still. But other than that, for the most part, I never really had that desire to move back home. And I think that as much as I love kind of the freedom of, choosing where I live and all the things, there are definitely trade-offs.
Yeah. I'm interested when you had that short stint back home after you had moved out and everything, what were you frustrated or like disappointed that you were doing that, or were you doing that more intentionally to kind of set up like whatever next opportunity was coming?
Yeah, it's a weird mix, because if you had told 18 to 22-year-old me that when I was, I don't know, 20, 23 or 24, that I was going to end up moving back home for a little bit, like I would have just laughed and been like so embarrassed by the thought of that. And I think there definitely was a little bit of that, like, but it wasn't like because I failed or anything. It was an intentional choice. And I think that honestly, whether I did a good job of admitting this or not, I think I was grateful. I was grateful to my parents that they even allowed me to move back in. But I also knew that it was temporary. And it was one of those things that was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable because it was like when you get out in the real world for a little bit and you get that taste of freedom, and it's like out for 5 or 6 years before I did this. Going back, like you gain this sense of agency over the way you spend your time, how you spend your money, what you eat, how you behave, like pretty much everything. And there's no one holding you in check for the most part. And that's cool. Maybe there's some downside to that too. But just like moving back in to your parents' house is almost like, for me, it was like, I got to figure out how to make the next step, whatever it is. I got to figure this out fast. I don't want to be the guy who, is living with my parents. I love my parents, but I had so much more I wanted to figure out, and it was a tough time. But the other unexpected thing, this is kind of a tangent, but it was a cool thing because it allowed me to, I know that, I don't know if this is as common as it is for everybody as it was for me, but like my parents and I had a pretty rocky relationship from ages like 17 through 22. Pretty rocky. Like,
I think that's relatively common. Trying to gain some independence, and you gotta set some new boundaries and stuff. So that's always a new experience for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. But I think like even that short stint moving back home was an opportunity for my parents and I to get to know each other for the first time as adults. And like, obviously I still had a lot of things to figure out as an adult at that age, but I didn't feel the pressure because I'd already been out on my own. I didn't feel the pressure to automatically comply to the way that they think or the way they do things. And I felt a little bit more freedom, and I was still figuring out who I was. And, I think I may always be, but I had enough self-awareness and ownership of my beliefs and ideas and like what I wanted in life that I didn't feel that pressure to be who my parents wanted to be anymore. And that took going out and moving away and leaving home and leaving my hometown and doing a lot of things to get to that point. And that brief stint living back home with my parents, I think was like the beginning of rekindling my relationship with my parents. And that was a really valuable thing. I don't know that that's my sales pitch that everybody should move back home. Maybe,
sure.
But there's definitely some value of that, but I don't think I would have been able to get that had I not ever taken the leap and like gone out on my own to start with.
Yeah, I think a lot of young people kind of go through those stages of like, all right, I need some separation from how I grew up, the people I grew up with. And then as you gain more of that independence in your own life, I think there's a natural, period where it's like you kind of reset those relationships to some extent. And obviously that doesn't require, moving back home or like, being in close proximity physically, but that's obviously it probably makes it a little bit easier too. Yeah. So just one other thing about my own experience, the probably, when you move to college, it's like 50% real because, you're typically not living like independently. You probably don't feel like like I'm really starting my own adult life yet.
Yeah.
Very much a transition period. So when I moved when I moved, once I graduated and then I moved to a new city, I moved to Atlanta, that probably felt more real for me. And I just remember being so, it was excitement, but also relief to be like, okay, I have a job. I'm able to like mostly live on my own, low paying job, but like, heck yeah, like I'm able to, live independently now. And I just remember signing that first apartment lease. Like that was just such an empowering moment and experience during that like first year of living on your own. You're trying to figure a bunch of stuff out. You're probably working for the first time, like a actual like full-time career type job, and trying to figure out personal stuff too. So anyway, other things that, I think we experience a lot with the participants we work with through Praxis and, friends of ours over the years, I think in overall, my experience has been people that are more excited and willing to like get out of their hometowns, get out of their state, set up a new life, like go take more initiative in building a life of their own. That's usually a valuable thing to do compared to, kind of delaying that process.
Are you, just had a side thought, are you really close? Is there anyone like from high school, or maybe not high school, but like different activity sports or anything like that from that time in your life that you're still really, really close with or regularly in touch with?
Not from high school, actually. Like I had really close friends when I was in high school, and then kind of just like over time gradually lost touch and communication became less and less regular and stuff. And then, I have close friends from back home that I kind of developed relationships beyond high school. And I have a handful that I stay in contact with, but high school definitely isn't the common denominator of those relationships.
Are most of those people still living at home, or have they moved away as well?
No, I mean, most of them are actually older. And so like when I met them, they had already, they're already kind of beyond that phase and everything.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, as I think about my own friend group, almost everybody that I would consider like the inner circle of friends that I regularly keep in touch with and am really close with, I can only think of one of those that actually lives home, like where they're from, and it was like recently moved back after a decade of living away. But like almost every single other person that I'm really close with outside of my family has been somebody who's moved away, and they've like gone out on their own, and they're, like building their life somewhere else. And I wonder if that has a big impact on it. Like, it's really hard to get started in a new city if you don't know anybody. That can be difficult. I remember the first time I moved away for good, like not just a short-term thing. And like, I only knew a couple of people, and that was kind of a scary thing. And the hurdles are a lot higher than they are for like moving away from college. Like, totally. It's easy to get plugged in and meet a ton of people that are your same age and interested in the same things when nobody has any real responsibilities, and literally all you're doing is like, socializing for the most part.
Well, yeah. I mean, college, if you're moving away for college, it's like going to boarding school, like you're in the same, and this isn't even to like shit on college or anything. It's a more artificial environment that you're in, like high school. And then like moving to a new city, and it's like, whether you're moving for a job or you're moving just for the sake of moving and kind of like starting your own life, like there's a lot less structure that comes with that. I think like when people move, and especially if they're going to work for like a startup with a bunch of young people, there's definitely some things about the culture with a company with a bunch of young people that can feel like high school or college socially sometimes, as you know. But yeah, that is an interesting point. With I think about my close friends from college. I have one or two that I stay in really regular contact with on like a one-on-one basis. Then we have our text thread with all of our buddies from that time, and we're just like shooting the shit occasionally and all that type of stuff. Pretty much everybody moved after college. And I think between close friends and family, I think that's something people learn how to do, is like, okay, I want to keep certain relationships strong. But moving away also forces you to figure out for yourself, like, what relationships are worth investing in, which ones not so much.
Yeah. And I think that just triggered another point. I think there's an important distinction between making an argument that everyone should move away and the argument that there's just value in doing that, whether you go back home or not. I think that I'm in the camp where it's obviously a function of like several different things. I was talking to somebody recently, is retired, just getting some wisdom off the cuff, drinking a cup of coffee with somebody that has a lot more life experience than me. And he said something like, we were talking about like moving around. He said he'd lived in like 28 different cities over the course of his career. And he said something, he's like, you get three decisions you get to make. You get to choose what you want to do for work. You get to choose, how much money do you want to make? And you get to choose where you live. And he's like, you really only get to choose two of those. If, like two, after you've made two of those, the third decision is usually made up for you. And I thought that was a really interesting and simple enough for me to understand way of looking at it, is that for me, I know that some of the things I want to do in life would be limited if I lived in my hometown. I would feel I would lose out on a lot of the for lack of a better term, like networking opportunities to like just be surrounded by people that are doing the kind of stuff that excites me and want to talk about and are interested in the same kind of ideas. And, you can get some of that online, but it's not the same as just being able to like go grab a beer with somebody and talk about ideas, then like wind down after work or whatever. And that's one of those things that, that's a small one, but those are trade-offs you make. And I think some people and this isn't to point fingers at anybody, but I think some circumstances based on like what you actually want out of life, your value system probably changes over time. I know mine has, but that evolved value system may fit just fine where you're from. I know I'm from a small, like rural agricultural town, and things would probably be different if I was from a bigger city where the types of business and work that I like to do. And that was
but even if you're from a bigger city, you definitely, knowing you, like, you'd want to experience something else too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this isn't to say that someday I might not end up back on like a farm or something, like isolated from everybody raising cattle or something. But the fact of the matter is, like, where I'm at now, I don't think that I set out to do this by design, but I think it's been a fortunate accident, if not by design, to like just kind of pursue where I wanted to be whenever I wanted to be there. And for the most part, like, there are definitely trade-offs of that, by moving around a lot more. But I think that it's also been a really cool way to shed beliefs and priorities and values that weren't really real, and test things, and also get like affirmation for what's important.
Yep. Yeah, I think moving it's like it can be a physical embodiment of choosing how you want to live your life overall, which can be really empowering for most people, I think. And you know, like what you were getting at earlier, it's ultimately it's a values and preference decision. I think we all know the type of person that you're like, hey, like they're gonna stay exactly where they grew up, and they're gonna be better off for it, or like, you know, they're super content, or like, yeah, you just expect them to do that and whatnot. But I think there's in that kind of like middle section of the population, I think for like taking those steps, like, okay, like I think I'm going to end up back here. And in my experience working with people, it's usually has to do with, okay, I value being close to family. I value having, you know, whether like a church community or something that I really care about investing in long term. I think for those types of people, those are the types of people that I would strongly encourage to move away for 1 or 2 years to, one, like, you know, question your own assumptions and just to get that experience and then bring it back, you know, to where you want to be. You'll most likely be better off for it. Now, when we're talking about people that want to prioritize, you know, building a more ambitious professional career, then I think having, you know, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're trying to kind of talk yourself into, well, I can have the small hometown life and I can, you know, force my way into like, you know, pursuing more ambitious professional ventures. Like, it's just not worth trying to, especially early in your career, it's not worth trying to pursue both and being stubborn about it. Like, if you want to be ambitious, like, go where opportunity is, move to a city where you can meet people that you can learn from, that you can, you know, that value the same things as you in those settings and stuff. Like that, I think
I'd push back on that a little bit, but
okay,
not with a crazy distinction. But I think it's also a function of like what it is you want to do. I mean, there are probably I know ambitious, like people who are really good businessmen, and they didn't need to move away to do what they wanted to do, and that's like an okay path. But I'm also going to make a distinction that I think I learned the hard way, and I'm sure that you'd probably agree with, is like, I think there's this old like Bible verse. There's one like, no prophet is accepted in his own hometown. And there's this kind of idea that I think is true, is like, it's really hard to make the break from being the kid down the street that everybody knew growing up and establishing yourself as a different version of yourself, a more mature, like serious, business oriented, or whatever you're, you know, whatever you're trying to do. Like, that's a big leap to make, particularly the smaller, like more close knit your community is. I think that that's a hurdle. Like, I know that for a long time I was my dad's son in town. You know, I haven't lived there in a long time, but that's like one of those things you do face when you stick around. That's not to say that you can't still do it, but I think it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always exceptions to rules. I think if you're the type of person that you're like, hey, I see this opportunity that's local, I think more often than not, that opportunity will be around, like, it's just an opportunity you could probably go after on a longer time horizon. And moving away and pursuing new opportunities and like going through that discovery process, I think, like, it's, you don't know what you don't know. And by getting out of your own bubble and your own community and what you grew up around is a way to get more information that you didn't previously have. So, like, you know, if, let's just think of like the stereotype of like local successful businessman, like, grew a business like locally, didn't really venture out or anything. I think even for people like that, they'd probably be in many cases like better served to go intentionally get a new type of experience. And they can figure out like, hey, actually the opportunities that are available to me are much greater than I think. Or like, hey, I'm able to take this experience back with me to what I suspected I want to do. Like, I think it's similar to like a kid who grew up in a family-owned business, and usually parents are like wanting them to take over the business eventually. I think in that case, it's valuable for the kid to go and get other experiences, and then be able to make the decision for themselves, like, hey, I actually do want to come back and run this thing, or actually this isn't for me. I found other things that I'm more interested in.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said of like the homogenization of culture in a small hometown, and like whether you change your mind or not, going out and being exposed to the diversity of ideas from whatever it is, whether you go experience another culture, whether you go to a different city and you go visit a similar business to yours that's in a different part of the world and go learn from them. Like there's so much value to that. I was thinking immediately of Sam Walton and like the story of Walmart, like in his book Made in America, where he's like, they start Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, not a big place. But like still throughout the book, he's like traveling all over the place, like flying to New York City. He's going and meeting all these people from all these different places. And like, as he identifies talent that he think is great and brings in some area of expertise that he can't find there, he brings them in. Sometimes it takes a while, but like he didn't have to leave this smaller community permanently, but going out and finding the thing that was missing and bringing it back was also that's another strategy, I think, on a longer time horizon. Here's another idea that I was thinking about too, though. I'm gonna bounce off you. Is I think there's this sense of disillusionment, and I felt this a little bit, is like the social pressure moving away. If you don't know what you actually want to do, like there's this pressure to feel like I have to have the whole story written before I move away, versus like just accepting.
The burden of proof is like, if you're making that type of move, then there better be a damn good reason for it.
Yeah. Right? And that's a curious point of view, that the default should be to stick around where you're at.
Yeah. I mean, I think, especially like a parent-child relationship, or, just older people in your life that, feel a sense of like protectiveness over you, that's just like how they respond to uncertainty, and I think it's just natural. I think a lot of people definitely get that type of social pressure, and I think it's easy for them to like get down on themselves for it and like question their decisions. And I think what I would tell them is like you just have to be confident in owning your own decisions, and realize like, hey, like other people are not as invested in your own decisions as you are. There's not a single person in the world that has more skin in the game on your own decisions than yourself. And I think it's difficult for young people because they look up to certain people that have more experience, or feel a sense of authority over them, and it can be hard to push back sometimes, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna wrap this up with a question for both of us. But all right, we're in our late 20s now. We've each kind of moved around a handful of times. Is there anything that you would do different as far as moving goes and living in different cities over the past 8-10 years?
You go first. You came up with a question. You probably already have an answer in mind. I'm going to need a second.
I actually don't. I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head. So in general, like, I'm not one to be like, oh, I regret doing these things and whatnot. But I think I would just push myself more. Like, I moved down south from the Northeast for college, and then I stayed in that same region until this past year, actually. So until I was like 20, almost till 29. And I'd probably push myself more to get further out of my comfort zone. And like, whether that meant like, hey, I'm going to do a bigger move, like across the country, or like, hey, I'm going to take 6 months and like force myself to travel internationally. Even though, that's not necessarily something that's like particularly important to me. But I think if I was talking to my, 18, 20-year-old self, I'd tell him like, take even bigger risks than what you expect to take.
Yeah. I think two things come to mind. I think first, I probably would have done it sooner. I probably would have moved away for good sooner. Like, I'm not counting going to college, but looking back with what I know now, I probably would have just moved away right out of college. If reliving this, I don't imagine myself would have been any smarter and like dropped out of college or not gone to a college. But I would have moved away sooner and like forced myself to figure that out. And two, I think I would have started thinking longer term sooner, and specifically as it relates to like personal finances. Like, I always knew I was in temporary spots and all the other times that I've moved before. And I think that I could have done a better job of planning, like, okay, well, like, let's start, saving more of my money so that the next time I move to a more permanent place, like, I'm in a better spot where it's less of a situation where I have to figure things out, and more of like, I don't even have to think about it. I'm ready to go because I've been planning for this. Even if I didn't know what I wanted to do, like that's probably something that a lot of younger people could do better. I'm a culprit there, just being smarter with personal finances.
I mean, that's definitely always something I would tell my 18, 20-year-old self to do a better job of, for sure. And pretty much I think it's impossible to be too informed on all those types of things. And it's just not something you probably put a lot of attention on until it's like, oh shit, I got to get this stuff together.
Yeah. It's harder to figure out after the fact too. So that's all. All right.
Sounds good.
Great banner.